Hello, my treasures. It's time for the first balancing changes since Audiopocalypse release for Standard Hearthstone. There also is one wild change. I'll go over that very brief, but let's begin with the nerfs. The first one is going to be to Purator, who is going to cost 6 mana instead of 5. This doesn't outright kill the card, it just delays the inevitable turn where your opponent's going to draw into like 8 cards using this card, making it a little bit more fair to play against for pure Paladin. May or may not make people want to try other decks besides just pure Paladin out, as you now have a reason to not always rely on the pure Paladin package. Overall, with this change, I'm actually quite happy with it. It doesn't straight out kill the card, as mentioned before, and it does allow you to still try to play around with a Menagerie pure deck, since we probably will see additional support for such a deck in the nearby future too. Now let's go on to the next card, which is going to be Disco Mall, which is going to cost 3 instead of 2 and increase the attack by 1. The attack increase probably won't matter too much. That makes it a little bit of a better removal tool for a lot of Paladin decks. However, the big change of it increasing the mana by 1 should allow the curve against pure Paladin or any of the aggro-based Paladin decks that can spam out a bunch of really cheap minions should be a lot better. What I mean by this is it should slow down the deck at least a little bit, where you're no longer going to be facing a 11-11 on turn 4 or 5, where it was almost impossible to deal with that big minion. And while I don't think this change absolutely kills the card, it does remove a lot of the high rolliness of the card, which felt incredibly bad to play against. Now for the next card, which is going to be to Feast and Famine. It's going to cost 2 mana instead of 1. I am actually kind of sad this card is getting changed. This is the change I expected them to do with Horn of the Windlord, because Horn of the Windlord is a new card, so why would they nerf that card when they could just nerf one of the older cards that never saw play until very recently? When it comes to decks that I made since Audiopocalypse release, Weapon Paladin was probably one of my favorite decks that I had made. It honestly was probably one of my favorite decks for Paladin in quite a long time, since it felt like a unique twist. However, I do think this deck might still be able to fully function. It's just going to have a little bit of a less high curve than it previously did have. The reason why they went for Feast and Famine instead of for Quel'thas is the fact that the Mana Thirst on this card gives a lifesteal, and because it gives a lifesteal, it could act as a full heal and thus allow you to actually get the combo off really easily while not having to worry about your opponent having a bunch of minions on board. Overall, generally, while I am sad about the change of this card, I do understand how frustrating this card was to play against, and probably is for the best for the overall health of the game. Now, let's get into the next changes. The first one is going to be Lady S'theno, who is going to have 1 attack instead of 2. I don't think this kills the card at all. I know people are already using Crazed Alchemist to swap the attack and HP of Lady S'theno. This change doesn't affect the fact that it can hit face, which is why it's so incredibly frustrating to play against. There's been so many games where I've been at almost full HP and my opponent just wombo combos me down to 0 because they have a card like this on board and I had no way to predict what other spells that they would have had in their hand. And given Blizzard keeps printing cards that easily support this card, even if they don't mean it directly, it means this is going to be a problem until she rotates out, or until they change her ability to only hit opponent's minions, which I don't think they're ever going to do, and that's going to mean this card is going to be a thorn in a lot of people's side until the rotation actually happens. And now for the next nerf, which is Hope of Quel'thas, where it's going to have 3 attack instead of 4. Talking about changes that don't really do anything, it doesn't affect the buff that you give all your minions wherever they are, which means this card is still perfectly playable in the current state. Now for the next card, which is going to be Posic, which he is going to have 4 attack instead of 5. This is one of those changes that I understand completely where they're coming from. This card was incredibly frustrating to play against if you were playing something that didn't have many early game removal tools, as it does have 4 HP. But with his current stat lines of being a 4/4 for 4 mana, you're going to be slamming him down mostly for those stats, which means he's not as playable as he was before when he had 5 attack. The one advantage that I could see with a card like this going into the future is this is going to serve more as a disruption tool than an aggro tool where it was currently being played. What I mean by this is most of the time your opponent just panics to put down both 3/3s before you get any type of advantage off of it, thus allowing you to delay a big combo turn or some type of AoE board clear that your opponent might be having in their hand. Now, for the next card, which is going to be the one wild change, Crimson Clergy, which is going to be banned in wild. This is mainly due to the fact of Funnel Cake, which was printed in the mini set. I know there was a combo within a wild where you could get infinite damage on like turn 3 or 4, depending on how you high rolled. But from what I've been hearing from other content creators that do play a lot of wild, this is honestly isn't a change that was really necessary, as the deck was only like a tier 3 deck. Now that we're through the nerfs, let's get onto the buffs. The first one is going to be Risa, who is going to be a 4-cost card instead of a 5-cost card. I don't think this fundamentally changed the playability of this card. It does allow you to slam it down a turn earlier and thus start to get the advantage off of its discount whenever you do bounce it back to your hand. There is a deck idea that I did have for this card that I kind of want to try out now, where we're trying to get as many copies of Multi-Strike as humanly possible. However, that does also still rely on the fact that the discount on this card is only to 1 instead of something like 0. If this card reduced its cost down to 0 instead of 1, I think it would be a lot more playable. And because it doesn't have charge on it, I do think that would still be kind of healthy for the game, though you might have to watch out for Quel'thas, who increases the attack of all your individual minions every time a rush minion does attack. Now for the next change, which is Fiddlefire Imp, where it's going to have 3 health instead of 2. A change that literally does nothing for the card. The card is probably unplayable, mainly due to the fact that it generates a random fire spell from both Mage and Warlock, and the fire spells for Warlock currently are just really not that good, even if there are only 3 of them. If they reduce the mana of this to 2 and then reduce its stat lines back down to a 3/2, I think that would make it a lot more playable than it currently is, but until we see something like that, I still think this card is probably pretty bad. Now for the last change, which is going to be Remix Dispensobot, which is going to be 3 mana instead of 4, being a 3/3 instead of 4/4. This makes the Thaddeus wacky combo that I had theorycraft for the mini set a little bit more playable, as you no longer have to rely on slamming this down before you try to pull off that combo. Even outside of that wacky combo, I do think this card will be a lot more playable than it currently is. This card does have a lot of synergy with a lot of the different archetypes that are within Standard Hearthstone for Mage. And honestly, this is probably the change they should have done to Fiddlefire Imp, as mentioned before, to make that card a lot more playable. So let me know down below what changes you're most looking forward to. I think Pure Paladin nerfs are probably the biggest changes out of them all. And besides that, I don't think most of these changes are going to do much. Now, like always, if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.